Okay, this is the preliminary site plan conference for the preliminary site plan for 218 West Market Street. I know we have attendees filtering in. I will start by real quickly going over our procedure for this, and then we'll move on through the agenda for a meeting for, well, it's every preliminary site plan conference we ever do. So the purpose of the preliminary site plan conference is an introduction when we have a new site plan. That's really all it is. I'll put the plan up in a minute here. I'll go through a little bit of details about the project that we've received, that the city's received, and the process about it. I'll ask that if the applicant wants to say a few words, that's fine, but it's certainly not necessary. And then we open it up for questions and comments from the attendees. That's really the main point of this, is to have a back and forth, clear up any kind of misconceptions out there, make sure everybody understands the process and what is being submitted. So with that, I will put the plan up. Sure I get the right panel. I've got way too much stuff open on my computer. This is it. Give me a second. There we go. Share that. And so hopefully everyone can see the site plan there. So as I said, this is for 218 West Market Street. Sorry, I'm making sure I can't see the chat while I'm doing this, and I want to be able to see that. There we go. Okay. Also, if people have comments or questions, just feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you so you can speak if you would like. So 218 West Market Street, as some of you are aware, hopefully everyone's aware, there was a special use permit request for this property several years ago. It was approved by City Council in September of 2020. The SUP request was for additional height beyond 70 feet, which is the maximum by right on this site. The SUP maximum is 101 feet. So that was granted, and additional residential density as well, above 43 dwelling units per acre. The maximum number of units permitted on the property after the approval of the SUP is 134 units on this property. This preliminary site plan that has been submitted to the city proposes 90 units, so not taking advantage of all of the residential density that was approved on the site. I'm going to scroll real quickly to a few sheets that people are probably interested in seeing. All of the conditions of the SUP are on this plan as per requirement. This is the existing site that we're talking about. So West Market Street is right here. This is the building that a lot of people have referred to as Artful Lodger, even though they're a tenant in the building, but a single-story commercial building with a parking lot that goes through to Old Preston Avenue. The proposed plan is for a building on that site that covers the entire site. So this is the proposed building. There's a vegetated roof shown here. That's what that hatching is. And then, as what will probably interest a lot of people, the parking layout. So this is off Old Preston, access off Old Preston down into this area. They're showing 59 parking spaces for the development. And this is the ground floor plan that they've shown. So 2 residential entries and then 4 retail spaces on the ground floor. You cannot actually have residential on the ground floor per zoning in this district. And this is the grading and drainage plan. They take up the entire site, so there's really, some of the stuff that we normally get into on a site plan in terms of stormwater and erosion and sediment control are going to be fairly basic on this because it's an urban site. And that's the stormwater management plan. So they do have that submission. This is a preliminary plan. So a little bit about the process. Like we said, the special use permit has been approved on this in September. So they are permitted to submit this. Preliminary site plans are what we call a ministerial review in Virginia. So if they meet all of the requirements of the zoning, the city has to grant approval of the project. This project, because it is subject to a special use permit, must go to the Planning Commission for preliminary site plan review prior to preliminary approval. And that will come at the determination of staff when it's ready to go. A lot of it depends on the amount of comments that the applicant receives in this review and their ability to address all the preliminary comments. Once the preliminary plan is approved by Planning Commission, the applicant then would need to submit a final site plan for review to the city prior to any kind of construction activity. So that would go through another level of review. We won't do a preliminary site plan conference for that. Final site plans are much more technical in nature. Once the final site plan is approved, the applicant can then submit for a building permit. Additionally, this site is in an architectural design control district, so there will be a submission to the Board of Architectural Review and a review through that body as well that needs to be complete prior to any final site plan approval. So hopefully that answers the process questions for that. Jeff Levine is the owner of this project and applicant. So if Jeff wants to add anything, he can feel free to do so.
So, hey, Brian, it's not Jeff, but it's Craig Katarski with the group representing Jeff. And Timmons prepared the site plan that's in front of us. So certainly if there are questions that we're able to answer, we will. The only clarification, Brian, that I would give, just so that there's no surprises to anybody, is we're still working on that unit count. And we're working with the architect to determine actually what we can, because I think the number that we have is 134 that's allowed per the special use permit. I think right now we were sitting around 90, but I think we are looking at ways to increase that. So that's something that will probably come back when we resubmit the plan. I just didn't want there to be any misunderstanding with that in regard.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and that was something I was going to note. I think if people remember the SUP proceedings in front of the Planning Commission, that might actually be a question that the Planning Commission, at least some planning commissioners might ask, is, we granted 134, why 90? Right. So that would be something that happens. Another item that I need to point out, this project, by virtue of the fact that it has residential density, additional residential density under a special use permit, it does need to comply with section 3412 of the city code regarding the affordable housing, either contribution or unit contribution or monetary contribution to the city. That is something that as we move through the site plan process, the applicant tends to finalize exactly how they're going to choose which of those avenues they want to use to comply with that section. So that will come through. I know some people might be thinking AMI limits. I believe the way the ordinance is written, 80% AMI is the number. Those are all determined by the code that we have. So I can't make them do anything beyond that. But certainly if they do, that's at their own discretion. So those are the items I have. We obviously have the engineer available for comment as well. If there are questions, if people could raise their hand and I will unmute you. But please do. And the other thing I would add, Joey, I have your email and I'm working on it, and I hopefully have a response to you with everything you're asking for later today. All right, Joey, you're muted, but there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. I actually got a copy of the site plan from Craig at Timmons, but I do see in your presentation that it's a 14-page document versus the 4-page document, which I have. Is it possible to get that full document?
So we do have that. I do have that digitally. It's a very large file. So maybe we can email after that and kind of determine how best to convey that.
Okay.
But we do have it.
So one thing I just noticed, it looked like it was in the first couple of pages, was sort of the staff requirements for the site plan. I just wanted to point that out. I have no idea who's on this call. All I can see is Brian. But if there are new people who have come into the project, I just want to reemphasize, I'm the manager of 110, 114 Old Preston Avenue, the triangular building that's on the lower part of the site plan that we're looking at right now. And as I think everybody on this call probably knows, we're a historic building with a stone wall that has had some structural issues in the past, and just want to reemphasize the staff recommendations or requirements, I guess I should say, for a baseline survey and protective plan throughout the process. I don't know when that would actually come to play. It might be after the building permit, or if there's a way to have any input earlier, I don't know. I think my main questions right now are just in terms of the footprint of the proposed building, which shows it going completely to the property line, what that would actually mean on our building side. In terms of using the stone building as a wall, the way the Artful Lodger building currently appears to. That's my main first question. And then I'll maybe bring up another question not related to that a little bit later.
Craig, did you want to chat about that in any way? Do you have any input on that?
I could talk about it at a high level, but Joey, I think it's a great question, and certainly it's something that I think for everybody involved, want to make sure that that's well coordinated. And if you're the right contact person, I'll ensure that we do get in contact with you sooner rather than later. I think just to start that dialogue. What I will say is this developer is also developed 600 West Main. And we had some of the same sorts of things. We did do some baseline survey and testing during construction to ensure that there wasn't settlement issues and things of that nature with some of the adjacent properties. And certainly those are things that we want to work out up front with everybody before construction even starts. Because obviously that makes for a much better project and much better relationships moving forward. So what I will do is I will pass that along and then connect with you just to talk through timing, if that makes sense, because we're at a pretty early stage with preliminary site plan at this point, still needing to go through final. So I would estimate we're over a year from construction of any kind at this point.
Okay. I appreciate that. And I am the main point of contact for that building. And I just want to say that I don't know if you're familiar with the way the current building on your property ties into our building, but there's I-beams that come in from the roof structure that are visible on our side of the wall. And so I guess I've been hopeful that I understand it's early in the project, but somebody from that project side would actually come see what it is and how extensive the connection is. Because I have tenants that are concerned about what would end up happening, basically.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Let us connect with you on that. I think certainly connecting you with the architect and the structural engineer would be worthwhile early on.
Okay, great.
And just to make sure that everyone for the meeting notes understands what we're talking about there are some conditions on the special use permit related to the proximity to historic buildings. In addition to the 600 West Main project, The applicant also has 612 West Main Street, which has a very similar condition, if not identical condition, related to an adjacent historic church. So this is something that, they did it on 600. They're going to have to do the exact same condition that they've got on this project on 612 West Main as well. So it's something that they probably have more experience with than any other developer in the city right now in terms of the requirements that we're putting on the proxy when they have a project that's this close to historic buildings. Another item that I would point out, Craig is aware of this from the comments that staff has made on the project. We are aware that Old Preston Avenue is the fire access to the mall. It cannot be closed for any very long at all. If it is, it needs to be temporary type of closures that can easily be reopened should the need become. And that presents some difficulties in terms of how this building gets built. So there's going to be a little more detail on this plan early on that the city's requiring in terms of kind of construction phasing and how a building like this does get built. We're asking for those details now so that we can start thinking about and start planning how exactly that happens. So I think the stuff that you're talking about, the conditions on the special use permit related to the adjacent building, are something that's also going to have to be incorporated into this kind of long range discussion now about, okay, how does this construction project happen? Site plan's one element of it, but you got to get the thing built as well. And we're going to be looking for details earlier in the process for this one in particular, because it's such a difficult site. And the accesses around it are important to keep open. I have another hand raised, so I will allow Linda Abbey to talk. If you can unmute.
Going along with what you said about the access, I'm wondering whether the building can be set back further from the edge of the road so that it's more, first of all, the construction could happen, but also when the building is built, pedestrians who go along that road, including me, would not feel so crowded into the street. Also, the traffic with 53 more cars for the parking spaces, and this whole project is going to be much more difficult. It's already difficult to access Market Street and any of the side streets off of Market, going up to High Street, for instance. And I was also wondering about the green space which Charlottesville is trying to do to increase. And this project would take down 18 trees. 2 of them are as big as the ones on the mall. And I was wondering if this might be ameliorated. All of this can be done through the developers, I think, and also affordable housing. I'm wondering about that. Lots of questions.
Yeah, lots of questions. Let me hit the traffic one because that does tie into the site plan. Our traffic engineer has made some comments related to a traffic analysis of the site. They're particularly concerned about the additional traffic on Old Preston because all of it comes in and out on Old Preston, and the impact on West Market Street. The assistant traffic engineer has made comments on this. They don't have, at this point, they're still in kind of in the data collection phase of that, where they're kind of doing a little further analysis about how the turning movements are going to work, what's that going to mean to the already existing condition at that intersection. And based on that analysis, there might be recommendations for improvements. It might be that the analysis says that it can be handled as is, but we're kind of in a wait and see mode on that from the planning perspective. But traffic engineering is very much on top of that. And as they know, the Old Preston access is one of the accesses that is very important that it stay there for fire access to the mall again. So that they're aware of that. The setbacks, the requirements in the code for this section, for this particular part of the city, are that buildings be built to the property line for the most part. 75% of the street wall needs to be built to the property line. They have to actually ask city council for special permission to reduce that down to 50% if they want to. So yeah, the setbacks, I mean, it's designed to be an urban condition. It's designed to present a street wall and frame the street. So that's the idea behind it. So I doubt there's going to be much appetite to reduce that. We'll see what the BAR says. But they only have a little bit of leeway in the zoning to permit that. So they do have a vegetated roof, which from a green space perspective, from an urban setting, that's probably in a building that's taking up an entire site. That's probably one of the kind of the best ways we can tackle that. And then I'm trying to think, affordable housing. So the way the affordable housing section of the city, the way the code works right now is the city was granted through an act of assembly years ago, a very specific affordable housing ordinance that we could enact. So we did enact that. It's 3412 in the code. That's why I keep mentioning 3412. It's section, chapter 34, section 12 of our city code has that language. That is the language that's currently on the books for the city. It is a zoning requirement. So there's not a negotiation. There's not any kind of back and forth between the applicant. The applicant, it sets out guidelines. They've got to meet them. So that's how it is. I know there's, the General Assembly did give us broader authority last year to amend that section, but the city has not undertaken that process. That's kind of envisioned as part of the comprehensive plan and zoning rewrites that are currently on that project, currently ongoing. So I think there's some hesitancy to kind of rush into changing that section before we know what we want to change it to. 3412 does require a certain percentage. Once you go above by right density on a project via special use permit, it takes the amount of additional units that you've gained or additional space that you've gained, and there's a formula that dictates the number of units that you would have to provide or a monetary donation or contribution to the city as housing fund in lieu of building those units. That's all managed through our housing office. There's actually, if they do units, there's a memorandum and kind of a deed restriction that comes with those that we've recently put together. But it's all prescribed. There's not any kind of bargaining around that. So they have to meet it. They don't have a choice. And the city has to accept it.
I have a couple other questions.
Okay.
The parking lot right now of the Artful Lodger is used as a cut through to get to the mall. And I was wondering if the if that's considered in the plan at all. And also, this building will be a gateway to the mall along with the Omni. And I'm just wondering if people will have to go through a building, what's the word I want? Like you go through with swords, that to get to the mall, because both buildings will be so tall. And I think the gateway to the mall is really, really important. I'm happy to see that you've increased the parking spaces and also happy to see that you've decreased the number of apartments in the building.
Okay. So I can, Craig, I don't know if you're speaking on behalf of Jeff. I noticed this is something that also staff has asked about, which is the management of the public space in that building, or at least the kind of the public spaces in that building that are there for the residential the residents and the residential access. There is there's doors on either end of it. It almost, I guess there's a question of, does this function like the Omni in York Place, where people that are looking to go from Market Street to Old Preston, if they're able to go through this, or if that's going to be, limited access for people with the keys to the building, what the intention is there. So that's something that's a question for the applicant. I'll say that, the condition around this in terms of the kind of urban form, that's ultimately a topic for the Board of Architectural Review, and their implementation and kind of stewardship of the urban design guidelines and historic district guidelines for this district. So I would, I'm going to probably defer to them in terms of those urban design questions, but it's something that the BAR will discuss as this project comes before them.
So Brian, I'll just, the one thing I can chime in with is in not trying to dodge the question, but it's one of the things that's still in development at this time, and trying to understand, is there sort of a common public space in which you access those retail tenants that'll be on the first floor. As you mentioned before, that's a requirement in the zoning, is that the first floor is not residential. But it's a wrestling between that and also knowing that, this is also sort of ends up being the front door for a lot of these people who are residents. So we're sort of wrestling on whether it's the right thing to have the circulation for the public that might be going to those retailers, having them be able to pass through, or just providing front doors for each of those retail spaces to the exterior of the building.
Okay, I've got Joey, I want to give you a chance.
So just to continue on that conversation, as someone who drives on Old Preston a fair amount, historically I used to come down Old Preston and turn around in the Omni loading dock. And I've stopped doing that, and I now go around and go through the Artful Lodger, which is basically a one-way street. So it's kind of serves as a one-way loop, because of already there being some congestion. So I'm a fairly big advocate of there actually being potentially some kind of throughway, given that there's a whole nother large downtown city block following this. It's basically merging two city blocks. And at a minimum, I would hope that there would be pedestrian cut through, which is what you all are discussing. And I understand that's still for discussion. To me, it feels natural that it would be on the side where the Escafé building is shown. But I guess it could be, that's where I think of mentally the block ending right now. And if it was one way, it could be narrower, like an alley, which I would assume to some extent one side of this building might need to sort of serve as some kind of alley for trash and deliveries, which I don't see which that would be at this time. So I don't have a really clear comment. I'm just sort of have thoughts on that. As someone who's over there a fair amount, that some kind of circularity I think is pretty important, because otherwise it would be from 2nd Street where the mall crossing is all the way down to the Lighthouse Theater is where people would have to go to cut through. My other question, maybe this is not a site plan question, is given the grade change on Old Preston, it looks like there would be retail 2 spaces facing Old Preston. I'm curious at what height they would be from an entrance standpoint. Like, would that feel like you're on, like this is an extension of the downtown mall and those are storefronts? Or is it that you go in that entrance, like you were talking about York Place, and it's an interior store or something?
Okay. Craig, do you have?
So as far as where you would be entering, each each of those retail locations may have different floor elevations. It's something that's being worked out with the architect and that they're studying as it relates to that building. And that's obviously also one of the things that kind of goes into whether there's a, a common corridor, if you will, internal to the building to each of those retail spaces, or if they're just, accessed off of West Market or Old Preston.
Okay. Linda, I'm going to unmute you. There you go. You got to unmute.
There, I got it.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there's a possibility that the building might not be 9 stories high, but only 6 stories high because of the reduction to 90 apartments, and that would create less shadow across Market Street and up above onto the McGuffey condos. I was wondering if that's possible for the developer to do.
I can look at, I'll scroll back up to the initial page here and put on what they're proposing. They have to put the building height on here. So the opposing, yeah, so they've proposed it to be 101 even with the 90 units. So it sounds like they're proceeding with what they received under the special use permit.
And Brian, I'll just mention again, like I had said earlier, that that unit count is continuing to be studied and most likely will move upwards towards that maximum amount that was granted with the special use permit.
Okay. Craig, are you aware, is Bushman Dreyfus still the architect on this? I know they spoke at the SUP. Okay, so they are. If there are other questions, please raise your hand. Joey's back on. I will allow you off. There you go, Joey. I think it automatically mutes you though.
Can I ask who is on this call?
In terms of,
I'm just curious if anyone else from the public showed up besides Linda and I.
Oh yeah, there's 6 attendees in the room, and then the 3 panelists you see.
Okay.
They haven't raised their hands, so they might just be listening. Sometimes that
That's
happens.
fine.
Preliminary site plan or waiting, Do you have any other questions, Joey?
I think I don't. I guess just maybe you already said this about process, but after this meeting, what would be the next step?
So because this is a project that has qualifies for, it must go through the 3412, the affordable housing section. They received a 21-day review on their original plan once it was deemed complete. So they received comments last week on the project. I think we're still waiting on one reviewer though, who's struggling with 21-day reviews right now. They would resubmit that plan obviously with an emphasis on any comment that's marked preliminary, that this is needed for preliminary review. And then the staff kind of consults with the reviewers, and if it gets to the point, once the plan is to the point where we feel we're okay with a preliminary approvals can be conditioned on things to be done on the final. So there's not a hard line when it goes to the planning commission. It's just kind of when we feel like there's no lingering large issues that are still of staff concern on the project, we'll send it to the planning commission. The planning commission usually hears these items on a consent agenda. If anyone's not aware of what a consent agenda is, it means it goes to the beginning of the meeting. Unless one of the commissioners has some sort of objection to approving that plan, they dispense with them very quickly at the beginning of the meeting. They usually do site plans that way because, once again, this review is ministerial. So if a planning commissioner, unless they can spot something on the plan that staff missed, some sort of section that the plan clearly violates on the zoning, they deny it. They have to let it go forward and approve it. So that's the reason why they do them on the consent agenda, because there's not a whole lot of value added to discussing them on a regular agenda. Once that preliminary plan is approved, they've got a year to submit a final plan. I'm assuming at that point, they'll probably get more into the BAR portion of it, because that's going to be one of the items that they need to address. And like Craig said, this is probably looking at, we're talking 12 months in terms of continued reviews of site plans, BAR, all that stuff, prior to being in the position to build a building. Answer your question?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Other questions? Feel free to raise your hand. All right, I'm not seeing any. I'm going to give Linda, yes, I'll allow you to talk. There you go.
The word I was thinking of is gauntlet between the Omni and this plan. I was also wondering, oh, no, I can't think of it. I'll talk later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to reiterate, that was what we're talking about is really an idea of urban design and urban form. And that's something that the BAR is kind of the experts on that. So we'll lean a little heavily on them, but I know there's differing opinions of that. There's not a fact-based way of tallying up what people like. Some people, there is some advantage to the framing of the street in terms of a sense of enclosure. There's, you can see everything that's going on in that space. So there are some people who, and a lot of our design guidelines are built around that. So I'm trying to explain why the zoning is the way it is, why you see projects like this. There's definitely a lot of ideas behind that, and encouraging that. But ultimately the BAR has got to apply their standards to the project and based on the context around it and come to some sort of agreement on what type of form it should take. And one of the ways they kind of address that, the feeling of it's a street wall followed by a step back. So if you see on the screen, there are step backs required. They're right here. So that street wall is going to be 40 feet tall, and then it will step back 10 feet before it goes up. So you will not have a sheer 100-foot wall on the street. So that's one of the ways we kind of mitigate that kind of looming factor of a building. Let's see, there. Linda, you are free to talk again.
Sorry, also by being 9 stories high instead of 6 stories high, this will be higher than the buildings in Washington, DC. And I think people are going to be surprised, just as they were with West Main Street, when it was built, just what kind of a space it becomes. And I think that it's going to destroy the character of Charlottesville and a lot of the things that make Charlottesville special to live in.
Okay.
I wonder how much that's being considered.
All right. The only thing I'd point out about that is the 101-foot tall height limit comes from an existing building on the mall, the Jefferson National Bank building. That's where 101, it's the height to the pediment of the Jefferson National Bank building that's already existing on the mall and is 101 feet. That's a sheer wall that goes all the way up. There's no step back there. There's several 100-foot tall buildings downtown. There's actually one building, the Monticello Hotel, old Monticello Hotel, is actually taller than that. So there are 101-foot tall buildings in the city now. The impact of this particular building, like I said, that's the Board of Architectural Review has a role. That's their role to determine, and that's something they will be looking at. The shading studies are a part of the special use permit process, and so if you don't have that document, I still have the copies of that. that show how the building as it was drawn during the special use permit process, where the differences between it and the current conditions in terms of shading. Most of the changes are in the kind of the deep part of winter when the sun angle is lower. But I do have that document if people are interested in seeing that. Go ahead, Joey.
Whether there's a pedestrian or driving cut through, is that part of this plan, or would that be later in the BAR process?
You know, the driving cut through, I frankly, I don't see it. I know the BAR is very, they don't like, you know, they try to kind of hide the entrances of parking garages as best they can. And I think the site, the way that it's proposed, I think that's gonna match up very much with what they're looking for in the downtown area. I think they probably are going to envision that Market Street be kind of uninterrupted all the way down without kind of an automotive access. So that's I think where we're going to see that. And also, you know, if there was a automotive cut through, then you're probably talking about the removal of a lot of parking. And so I'm not even sure that they could meet the parking requirement. They do have, you know, a requirement for 1 space per unit above the by right that they have to meet on this site. So those are probably the 2 factors that are working against that particular concept. The pedestrian access, I think that's a discussion between applicant and staff. There are code sections that at least allude to a pedestrian circulation system through a site that connects public rights of way. So I know our pedestrian coordinator is kind of pushing for that to be an open public pathway. And we'll see what the applicant responds with.
I mean, 2 comments just in response. One is, couldn't the parking, if it's underground parking, go below a cut through to maintain the same footprint up to the property line below ground, I guess? I mean, I guess that's a structural question. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the other thing is, I understand wanting some continuity and not having parking garages visible, but this really is like literally the way it's like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th blocks. Like this is where a street naturally falls. And so like this is really pushing 2 blocks together. And just in terms of reference of what it's like to be in DC, I just hate how large the blocks are. And I think that discourages discourages people from wanting to get out of their cars if it feels just like these gigantic blocks, you know, that you're having to go around. So I think some people already feel like mobility in a car is difficult downtown. So I'm just going to keep bringing that up, I guess, in my opinion.
Okay. But, yeah. All right. Other questions? I've got 2. I'm going to allow Miss Euler. Hopefully I said that right. You need to unmute. You're still muted. All right, I'm not. All right, I will. I'm asked to unmute, so I will move on and come back if I can. Linda Abbey, you are unmuted. There you go.
Going along with what Joey said, I think Charlottesville is attracting older people, retired people, and for them to ride bikes and walk is difficult. And so having a place where they don't have to walk as far or ride bikes, I think is important. I think it's important for the whole part of Charlottesville to consider that, because that is what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other comments, other questions? All right. Well, if there are none, I will bring this meeting to a conclusion. So we do know I've conveyed where things are going to be going from here. If you do have other questions or comments that you want to bring up that hit you at 3 in the morning or whenever, don't hesitate to email me. It's my last name right there on the screen, HALUSKA @charlottesville.gov. So you can email those to me. You can also call me. My office phone is 434-970-3186. That's my direct line. So any questions you have, any comments, if you just want to know what the status update is, feel free to reach out to us. As I said, this item will probably be on a future planning commission agenda for preliminary site plan approval at some point in the future, probably near future, next few months, depending on the response from the applicant. And it will also be on BAR agendas as well. So look out for those. If you're within 500 feet, I believe you will get mailings for both of those meetings. So be on the lookout for those. And other than that, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much for your attention and attending. All right.